I'm very happy to be here with my friend Dana Marsh. Um, Everybody knows Dana, of course. He's very well known as a singer, a choral singer, a solo singer, a conductor, a superb organist, a musicologist, expert in, I think, mostly English Renaissance polyphony. He's the conductor of the Washington Bach, I don't know what's called, Bach Ensemble, Bach Consort, major performance institution in the DC area. And most important for our purposes is the director of the historical performance program at Indiana University, which is a big important institution in historical performance, in a big important institution in music. So I'm really happy to see you, Dana, and nice to have a chance to chat with you about whatever we end up chatting about. What do you think about the well, tell us about your own experience, the place of historical performance, as you now call it. I notice you changed the name from the Early Music Institute, the place of historical performance in the context of a much larger music school, which of course is the situation we sort of think about at Juilliard too.
Right, right. First off, thank you so much, Tom, for having me along here. It's a real pleasure and honor. Um, well, essentially, I mean, if we just think of the words historical performance themselves, although we've certainly attached a lot of baggage of various kinds of meanings over the years through early music and things like that, historical performance really just means, I mean, it could cover music going, it could cover Shostakovich, it could cover Schoenberg, it could cover the Beatles. Um, but the point being that one is approaching a particular repertory that isn't new now, uh, in a way that has some sort of fidelity to the way that musicians working at the time it was new and popular might have approached it. And that's really sort of the number one thing. So we could be looking at music of the Far East, we could be looking at Indian music, we could be looking at Moroccan music. So the way I see it is that the definition is really very wide open, and I think there are a lot of folks who are just starting to push that envelope out in multiple directions.
So, how does that work in the context of a traditional music institution that, well, I mean, I don't want to put words in the mouth of Indiana University, but the basic conservatory idea is you go there, they tell you what to do, and you do it, and then you go away and get a job doing it. Um, and for a long time, there was not any early music in higher education much. It all took place in summer workshops and around the edges, and you went to Europe and that kind of thing. And the what was the Early Music Institute and is now your Historical Performance Institute is the first, essentially, it's the milestone, it's the pioneer of early music in higher education in North America, as far as I'm concerned. So how does it work? How does it work for you in that larger musical context?
Right. Well, you mentioned a very good point that, when you have a conservatory that's situated on a public research university campus, there are many ways that, yes, on the one hand, you can take that aspect of the education from which you're getting your piece of paper degree and learning about music theory, music history, performance. But there are also other centers and other institutes on a campus that broadly deal with the same time period. So, for example, there might be a medieval studies institute or a Renaissance studies center or an 18th century studies sort of thing. We've also got a Latin American Music Center at the Jacob School here. So what that means is that there, at least in the area of scholarship, there are any number of different perspectives and lenses that can be brought to bear on the music we're working with. And sometimes that can be the most insightful. The information that comes to us, maybe even from non-musicians who work on those periods and see it through a very definite perspective, that can actually have a transformative kind of effect on how we view what we do.
Sure. And I suppose there may be places in which you have a transformative effect on what other people, how other people do what they do. Let me ask you this. This is a purely ignorant question. Are the students in the Historical Performance Institute specific to the institute? Uh,
Hmm.
and or do you also deal with people who do other things? I mean, secondary lessons, or how to play the Baroque violin, or do you want to sing some Renaissance music, or some of both? How does it work sort of technically for you?
Definitely sort of both.
Mhm.
Generally speaking, on average, we'll tend to have maybe about 30 majors who are all majoring in historical performances, but then we'll have again maybe anywhere from 30 to 50 folks who are on sort of the modern side of things, but
Mhm.
who want to learn. So, for example, in the Baroque Orchestra, I'd say 80% of the violinists who come in tend to be from modern studios. And that kind of ratio can figure through other parts of the department as well. But yes, in Renaissance music as well, you may have some music theorists who want to take up the viol, or musicologists. That often happens. Often organists get very interested because, of course, that's such a major part of church music.
Yeah.
So yeah, it all figures in.
So when you say 30 majors, those are undergraduate majors,
No, chiefly graduate.
chiefly
Um,
graduates, but
we're
they're doing an HP degree of some kind at the master's or doctoral level, right?
that's right. That's right.
Um, and the Baroque Orchestra is kind of, I don't want to say a training orchestra, but if I was a violinist in somebody's studio and wanted to learn the Baroque violin, would I do it by joining Stanley's orchestra, and he maybe would hand me an instrument or a bow and say stand in the back and do what the others do? Is that how that would work?
In part, generally speaking, they also would need to take lessons
Ah,
with
yeah,
him as well, just to make it. Because of course, the beginning of every year, you've got a new group of people coming in who all sort of need to get up to speed rather quickly.
yeah.
So that by the end of the year, it's a group that's quite shaped up stylistically.
Interesting, as I was talking with Ross Duffin the other day, one of the things we reminded ourselves, I don't need to remind you, but is that most people don't learn an early instrument in high school.
That's right.
So that
That's
if they're
so
going to do it at all, it's going to be at the university level. And so, unless people in higher education provide that sort of open doorway, it's probably not going to happen otherwise. So in a way, it's a service that you provide. In a lot of places, people feel, oh well, secondary people, nah, if we have to fill up the piano studios with secondary people, so be it. But but there's a sense in which that's a really important part of, I don't want to say our missionary work, but it's the way people learn about the ancestors of their own instrument, or about the instrument they're actually interested in, is at the college level, right?
absolutely true. And that's right. So a modern violinist, might start Suzuki at age 4 and be practicing all the way through high school so that by the time you finish your undergraduate degree, you're at a particular kind of level. That's generally not quite the same, no matter how accomplished one might be on a modern instrument. Generally, uh, folks, for the most part, tend to be newer to early music at the master's level, which makes a bit of a challenging process from the standpoint of having people prepared, because you're sort of shoehorning in not only an undergraduate standard, but some similarity to where things should be by the end of master's degree. So it's definitely a challenge, but we're trying to increase our undergraduate load here because that's just a golden opportunity.
Absolutely, yeah. So of the maybe you don't know about their prehistories very much, but of the people who join your program, do they switch in from other things, or do they apply to the Historical Performance Institute to do a degree with you, already having some chops acquired somewhere else? How does that work?
Little bit of both.
Uh-huh.
So literally the last couple of weekends, we just had interviews for next year. Um, some of them have very little experience in early music, but have incredibly good chops, as it were, as players of whatever the instrument might
Yeah,
be.
sure.
So I would say, although we've had some really fantastic majors here, we've also had a number of folks come out of here as secondaries who then say went to the Juilliard Historical Performance Program
Yeah.
after finishing masters in modern, but minoring in like people like Rachel Wong or Augusta Lodge, and so these are this it's really the outreach of the department in a sense. It's a service to the school,
Yeah,
really.
absolutely. Would you say that I don't know how many people there are who are your faculty, but
Mm.
let me ask you that in just a second. Of the big range of repertory that historical performance often covers. One of the reasons for not calling it early music is because, as you say, Shostakovich and Schoenberg and any music that's not being created right now is, in a sense, historical. So all music is historical except contemporary music of today. But generally, we think of medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, and classical as being the range. Would you say that your students and your faculty generally cover that whole range and the population is evenly distributed, or do you have a great big Baroque balloon, is what I would suspect?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, folks come in with mainly Baroque on the radar.
Hmm.
But however, we make a point, particularly in the master's degree, to make certain that folks have as much background as possible also in medieval music and Renaissance music and performance practices for those areas. Um, but also, they'll have a chance, perhaps in the context of the chamber music program, to go much further forward. So we do have a forte piano on which Schubert and Schumann are perfectly appropriate. So have been able to cover, from basically from Hildegard to Mendelssohn.
So you want every student to have some kind of a broad overview of a much broader field, right? Is that is that because, I mean, I agree, and is that because everybody ought to know all that stuff, or is that also something you think of as a kind of potential professional preparation?
I think, these days, the more flexible we are and the more adaptable we are to the circumstances around us, that's always a good thing. Um, but I think, when it comes to, I think it's always good in principle to start as early as possible because it's good to understand that historical background from the right direction,
Right,
right? So we
absolutely.
don't want to be sort of importing, for most people, for example, in Baroque music, Handel is sort of the gateway. A lot of singers, it's that way, certainly, but not necessarily through Caccini or through
Mhm.
Monteverdi, right? So that's the thinking there, really.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So, of the you have a large faculty, which makes sense because you're a large music school and a large and important program, and I expect that you have the teachers in your program, some of whom are full-time professorial faculty, and some of whom are I don't know, there are probably different names for the different kinds of levels and things. You probably have a substantial number of people. You need a lot of people because you have a lot of different instruments and specialties that you're trying to teach. Um, of those people, I mean, just
Yeah.
of warm bodies, how many warm bodies are there associated with the Historical Performance Institute? And of those, are some of those also involved with other activities at the Jacob School? That is, are they crossover people, or are they people? And I suppose some of them are people who come in on a part-time basis to deal with a very specialized subject. So, could you tell us a little bit about how that picture works?
Sure. Well, we currently have 5 full-time tenured or tenure track positions in our department,
Wow.
and one of those is shared with brass because Rick Serafinoff
Right, yeah.
teaches modern horn, but has, of course, for decades been a major teacher in horn and a builder, of course, as well. So we have a bit of a share and share alike thing going there. But in addition to those 5 full-time faculty, we have 10 part-time adjunct, because of course, in some areas it's hard to get more majors. You're not going to have 10 bassoon majors or
You
oboe.
don't want 10, but forgive me.
But I mean, and same thing with recorder and other areas. And so it's, one thing that one reality that we all face looking at higher education, of course, is it's sort of what is the future of tenure track positions. And of course, students now, as they did in my generation, look toward such traditions as a way to kind of anchor a career with a certain measure of stability while still being able to freelance, as it were, or play regularly with particular ensembles. And it's hard to say what the future of that's going to be. It used to be that our department had 9 tenure positions going back about 20 years. But it's hard to justify now because the whole economy of how universities work, how many majors do you have? How many credit hours is that? It all goes into these economic models.
Yeah, well, but that's a substantial number of people, and it seems to me that a lot of musicians in this world follow that pattern that you just described of being competent working performers, but wanting also to share the skills and talents, and also find some element of stability. So what it means is that a lot of people in the future are probably going to have to put together a package that has a lot of different pieces to it. I don't know how that's going to be, but speaking of that, I mean, how do you think things might develop in the future? I'm not saying let's see a crystal ball about the music world, but anything you have to say, that would be fine. And what about, is there a changing role of historical performance in higher education? You say that the program is, at least in terms of faculty, is smaller and differently arranged than it was before. Is that a continuing trend? What do you see? What do you see for the future?
Well, I think there are a lot of folks that feel, there shouldn't be this big conceptual divide between so-called modern performance and historical performance, that what early music and historical performance have had to offer all along that has been accepted or not accepted to varying degrees are certain kinds of performance values, certain kinds of historical values. Should we play Bach on an instrument that he might have recognized? And, is that important? Now, of course, we know what happened 40, 50 years ago with Bach. We've heard it on every instrument possible, in part because the music speaks wherever you put that. But it may not be the same with Monteverdi or Purcell, for that matter. So I think either the larger conservatory is going to start to be more and more receptive, as indeed it has over time, and start to incorporate some of these ideas so that the need to have separate departments for this may not be as strong. That's one way it could go. It's very hard to say. On the other hand, I think the whole notion of specialization, although it's taken a few hits in recent years, the pendulum may swing the other direction. And so, gosh, I wish I could have a clear view of that. But there are a number. I think right now we can be pleased that there are overall a number of good things that have happened, in the sense that, gosh, you think back to the 1980s, major orchestras weren't programming Bach back then. They just didn't. And there was a lot of animus between the two. But that's not so much the case anymore. And I think there was a point when folks thought that the LA Philharmonic might have its own Baroque orchestra
Right.
and classical orchestra at one point, but that never quite happened. So I think a lot of the possibilities are still out there. I think higher education, generally speaking, no matter what the subject is up in the air in many ways right now. It's a tenuous future, and we just have to hold fast to it.
What do you think? Okay, here's the talking about hard questions. How do you think young performers in the field nowadays might position themselves
Yeah.
um, with
Yeah.
a view to being useful in higher education and in the world?
Well, I think specifically in historical performance, one wants to look at what are the big trends right now in research. And I'll just mention three of them. One of them is improvisation, to be sure. Now, that's never been anything foreign to the idea of historical performance. It's always been there. The treatises have always been there. But folks haven't necessarily taken them so fully on board because one does have to, if you're going to follow certain rules, as if they were second nature, you have to immerse yourself to that degree to be able to teach it. And so I think that's really catching on. And the way you see that is that the big funding bodies are putting money that way. So for example, you get a place like McGill University where Julie Cumming and Peter Schubert were able to do lots of work on Renaissance improvisation very successfully over a long period of time. And it's happening elsewhere. You have folks like at Harvard, like Robert Levin, who were trailblazers in the area of classical improv. So that's an important one. I think another area, and this deals more closely with 19th century performance practice, is the incredible rise of sound archives over the last 20, 25 years. So there's Charm in the UK. It's an acronym for the Center for Historical Analysis of Recorded Music. And what we're learning about 19th century performance practice just that way has been mind-blowing. And so there are areas where our field is being enriched by work that's going on right now. And then also by going beyond the Western canon as well. So there's a lot of new exciting stuff going on out there. So I would suggest to people to find an area that you can focus on and really kind of blow it out of the water, really go with it.
Get really good at something.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, especially now it's just really important.
Well, I think it is too, Dana, and I'm really glad that you're in the leadership position that you're in. We've never needed somebody with your kind of charisma and good sense and judgment the way we do now. And Indiana has always been kind of a beacon in early music since the days of Tom Binkley. You're a more than worthy successor, and we're really pleased to have this chance to chat with you. I think it'll make a big difference to my colleagues at Juilliard. We're all jealous of all the stuff you have, but we're all doing the best we can wherever we are, and we'll hope along with you for a bright future for historical performance and for higher education, and in particular for the Historical Performance Institute at Indiana University. So thank you, Dana Marsh, very, very much.
Oh, thank you. That's very, very kind. And your students are lucky to have you.
How